So in this lesson, we'll be looking at the end of stave 1 and the beginning of stave 2, which is to do with Marley's warning. And again, we're going to be looking at how Dickens presents the supernatural in this chapter. So there's a number of words that a 19th century reader would have been more familiar with compared to a 21st century reader. Those words are unavailing, which means to achieve very little or nothing, abode, which is another word for home, penance, another word for punishment, countenance, which is a person's face, incoherent, which is expression or expressed in a confusing way, lamentation, the expression of grief or sorrow, dirge, which is a lament for the dead, enshrouded, cover completely or hide from view, fatigues, extreme tiredness, opaque, non-transparent or not transparent, preposterous, opposite of reason or common sense, triumphantly, to show great happiness at an achievement. So just a quick reminder of what has happened so far in the novella. Scrooge has been visited by his old friend Marley as a ghost, and Dickens has described Marley as carrying a long chain which is full of items such as padlocks and cash boxes. It held up its chain at arm's length as if that were the cause of all its unavailing grief, and flung it heavily upon the ground again. At this time of the rolling year, the spectre said, I suffer most. Why did I walk through crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down, and never raise them to that blessed star which led the wise men to a poor abode? Were there no poor homes to which its light would have conducted me? Scrooge was very much dismayed to hear the spectre going on at this rate, and began to quake exceedingly. Hear me, cried the ghost, my time is nearly gone. I will, said Scrooge, but don't be hard upon me. Don't be flowery, Jacob, pray. How it is that I appear before you in a shape that you can see, I may not tell. I have sat invisibly beside you many and many a day. It was not an agreeable idea. Scrooge shivered and wiped the perspiration from his brow. That is no light part of my penance, pursued the ghost. I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate, a chance and hope of my procuring Ebenezer. You are always a good friend to me, said Scrooge. Thank ye. You will be haunted, resumed the ghost, by 3 spirits. Scrooge's countenance fell almost as low as the ghost's had done. Is that the chance and hope you mentioned, Jacob? He demanded in a faltering voice. It is. I think I'd rather not, said Scrooge. So in this section of the text, Dickens describes old Marley as saying, why did I walk through crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down and never raise them to that blessed star which led the wise men to a poor abode? In this section, it could be the fact that he never followed this blessed star, which could represent God, who directed the wise men to Jesus. Marley is therefore lamenting the fact that he never really saw God, because if he had, God's light would have shown him the way to help others in their poor homes. Perhaps the 3 ghosts are also symbolic of the 3 wise men. In this section, we also learn that Marley has been watching Scrooge as a ghost for many days. He warns Scrooge that watching him was only part of his penance, as he is living in purgatory. We learn he has also been sent to teach Scrooge a lesson in order to escape the same fate as Marley when he dies. Scrooge is at first unwilling to accept this chance to learn and escape the same fate. Without their visits, said the ghost, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow when the bell tolls 1. Couldn't I take 'em all at once and have it over, Jacob? Hinted Scrooge. Expect the second on the next night at the same hour, the third upon the next night when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look that, for your own sake, you remember what has passed between us. When it had said these words, the spectre took its wrapper from the table and bound it round its head as before. Scrooge knew this by the smart sound its teeth made when the jaws were brought together by the bandage. He ventured to raise his eyes again and found his supernatural visitor confronting him in an erect attitude with its chain wound over and about its arm. The apparition walked backwards from him, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little, so when the spectre reached it, it was wide open. It beckoned Scrooge to approach, which he did. When they were within 2 paces of each other, Marley's ghost held up its hand, warning him to come no nearer. Scrooge stopped, not so much in obedience as in surprise and fear, for on the raising of the hand he became sensible of confused noises in the air, incoherent sounds of lamentation and regret, wailing inexpressibly, sorrow and self-accusatory. The spectre, after listening for a moment, joined in the mournful dirge and floated about on the bleak, dark night. Scrooge followed to the window. Desperate in his curiosity, he looked out. In this section of the text, old Marley's ghost is preparing to leave Scrooge and warns him of 3 ghosts that will visit, one each night at 1 a.m. Marley leads Scrooge to a window where he shows Scrooge a number of ghosts. This shows that Marley is not alone in torment, but thousands of others as well, and if Scrooge doesn't change his ways, he will become like them, unable to change his fate. Whether these creatures faded into mist, or mist enshrouded them, he could not tell, but they and their spirit voices faded together, and the night became as it had been when he walked home. Scrooge closed the window and examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double locked, as he had locked it with his own hands, and the bolts were undisturbed. He tried to say "humbug," but stopped at the first syllable, and being, from the emotion he had undergone, or the fatigues of the day, or his glimpse of the invisible world, or the dull conversation of the ghost, or the lateness of the hour, much in need of repose, went straight to bed without undressing, and fell asleep upon the instant. In this section, the ghosts are described as creatures to show that they no longer resemble humans. We see that Scrooge is still questioning whether these events are real by repeating his earlier actions of checking whether the door is locked. However, as he tries to say humbug but cannot, we now know that he is starting to accept that the events really did take place. He is so bothered about what has happened that he can't perform the necessary daily tasks like undressing, and therefore the supernatural occurrence has mentally drained him to the point of exhaustion. Stave 2, the first of the 3 spirits. When Scrooge awoke, it was so dark that looking out of bed he could scarcely distinguish the transparent window from the opaque walls of his chamber. He was endeavouring to pierce the darkness with his ferret eyes when the chimes of a neighbouring church struck the 4 quarters, so he listened for the hour. To his great astonishment, the heavy bell went on from 6 to 7, and from 7 to 8, and regularly up to 12, then stopped. 12? It was past 2 when he went to bed. The clock was wrong. An icicle must have got into the works. 12? He touched the spring of his repeater to correct this most preposterous clock. Its rapid little pulse beat 12 and stopped. "Why, it isn't possible," said Scrooge, "that I have slept through a whole day and far into another night. It isn't possible that anything has happened to the sun, and this is 12 at noon." The idea being an alarming one, he scrambled out of bed and groped his way to the window. He was obliged to rub the frost off with the sleeve of his dressing gown before he could see anything, and could see very little then. All he could make out was that it was very foggy and extremely cold, and that there was no noise of people running to and fro and making a great stir, as there unquestionably would have been if night had beaten off bright day and taken possession of the world. This was a great relief, because 3 days after sight of this first of exchange pay to Mr. Ebenezer Scrooge or his order, and so forth, would have become a mere United States security if there were no days to count by. So the beginning of this section shows how time is passing quickly as he hears the town clock striking each hour. Scrooge tries to explain this logically by thinking an icicle has got into it. Scrooge still struggles to make sense of this and touches the spring of his repeater. A repeater was a part of a mechanical watch that chimes on the hour, but even this has stopped. Scrooge believes that he's lost another day, that the sun didn't rise and it was 12 in the afternoon. Later, the action of Scrooge rubbing away the frost may foreshadow how the ghosts are there to make him see clearly, or how they will wipe away all the frostiness and bitterness that belongs to Scrooge. Scrooge is then relieved that he hasn't lost any days at the end, as he would stand to lose money, as people were given 3 days' grace to collect the money, which again shows how business orientated he was. Scrooge went to bed again, and thought and thought and thought it over and over and over, and could make nothing of it. The more he thought, the more perplexed he was, and the more he endeavoured not to think, the more he thought. Marley's ghost bothered him exceedingly. Every time he resolved within himself, after mature inquiry, that it was all a dream, his mind flew back again, like a strong spring released, to its first position, and presented the same problem to be worked all through. Was it a dream or not? Scrooge lay in this state until the chime had gone 3/4 more, when he remembered, on a sudden, that the ghost had warned him of a visitation when the bell tolled 1. He resolved to lie awake until the hour was past, and considering that he could no more go to sleep than go to heaven, this was perhaps the wisest resolution in his power. The quarter was so long that he was more than once convinced he must have sunk into a doze unconsciously and missed the clock. At length it broke upon his listening ear. Ding dong! 1/4 past, said Scrooge, counting. Ding dong! 1/2 past, said Scrooge. Ding dong! 1/4 to it, said Scrooge. Ding dong! The hour itself, said Scrooge triumphantly, and nothing else. At the beginning of this section, we can see Scrooge trying to make sense of what has happened. He's trying to forget about it, but can't. Like a child, Scrooge is so terrified of the night time that he can't fall back asleep. He figures he'll stay awake until the 1 o'clock hour has passed, and thus determined that his encounter with Marley's ghost had been a dream. In a clever simile, where it says, and considering that he could no more go to sleep than go to heaven, the narrator mentions that Scrooge can't go to heaven. Literally, cannot, because he hasn't died yet. Furthermore, should he die, his soul would probably be sent to hell, or, as Marley put it, his soul would be condemned to roam the earth for eternity, forbidden from entering heaven.